Once upon a time, many moons ago, there was a rich man and his wife who had everything that money could buy. However, there was one thing that eluded them: a child. They prayed every day, begging and pleading with the gods to grant them the gift of a son or daughter to complete their perfect life. One winter day, the wife was peeling apples beneath a towering juniper tree in the courtyard. As she worked, she accidentally cut her finger, and drops of blood fell onto the pristine snow below. She stared at the ruby-red drops as they seeped into the white powder, and a strange feeling overcame her. Without knowing why, she made a wish for a child with skin as white as snow and lips as red as blood. Suddenly, just like the drop of blood moments before, a bright red berry plopped into the snow. She picked it up, looking above for more, but finding none. The woman placed the berry in her mouth, letting it burst with sweetness across her tongue. The wind suddenly picked up, howling through the branches of the juniper tree, and the woman felt a chill run down her spine. Then she shrugged it off and went back inside, but she did feel a bit more restless than usual. In the days that followed, the woman quickly became aware that she was with child, but she also knew that there was something wrong. As her belly swelled, she grew sicker and sicker, and after 6 months, she was gravely ill. The doctors were baffled, unable to explain the mysterious illness. "The baby is going to drain her of life completely," one doctor warned. But they did their best to make her comfortable, and all they could to deliver a healthy baby. One day, the woman took her husband's hand into her own and spoke in a voice that almost wasn't there. "The juniper tree gave us this child," she said. "Promise that you'll bury me beneath her." The husband, racked with grief, agreed to his wife's request. Weeks later, a beautiful baby boy was born. He had skin as white as snow and lips as red as blood, exactly as the new mother had wished. Cradling the child in her arms, she died of happiness, content knowing that her wish had finally been granted. The man kept his promise and buried his beloved wife beneath the juniper tree. Life continued on, and a year or so later the man fell in love with another woman. They quickly married, and she became pregnant almost instantly. Their new daughter was just as beautiful as her half-brother, but they'd never be the same in his stepmother's eyes. She hated the boy and saw him as nothing more than a threat to her daughter's inheritance. So the woman did everything she could to make his life miserable, denying him treats while spoiling her daughter and belittling him at every turn. His own father did nothing to stop the torment, for he was too afraid of losing another wife's love and affection. The boy was forced to suffer in silence, living in fear of his cruel stepmother's wrath. One day, the stepmother devised a wicked plan to rid herself of the boy once and for all. She lured him to the barn where she revealed a trunk of apples and offered him one. She'd smeared them all with poisonous wax, enough to kill the boy with only a single bite, and his father would simply think he'd fallen ill. "They're as red as blood," she promised. "Take a look." But as he looked closely and reached for an apple, she was overwhelmed by the opportunity and slammed the lid of the chest onto his neck. The boy was decapitated. The woman began to panic, with no idea how she'd explain this to the boy's father, and upon hearing her own daughter calling out for her, she quickly devised a plan. She set the boy's body in a chair, balancing his head perfectly and wrapping a tie around his neck. Then she placed one of the shiny red apples in his hand just before her daughter burst into the barn. The girl couldn't stand the sight of her brother having something that she didn't, and she pulled the apple from his hand and raised it to her mouth before her mother could stop her. She screamed at her beautiful daughter, but it was too late. The girl had taken a bite, and startled by her mother's sudden outburst, she jolted the boy's body. She screamed, looking at her own mother in horror, and sprinted from the barn. But after only a few steps, she collapsed, already succumbing to the effects of the poison. Her mother caught up to her and held her as she died, begging for forgiveness. The woman was beside herself with fear and guilt, and she knew she had to cover up her crimes before the father returned. She set to work dismembering the boy, cooking him into a blood stew. Unable to do the same to her daughter, she gently wrapped the girl in a tapestry and placed her body on top of the trunk. When her husband returned home, she greeted him with a nice, warm meal. The children had gone to stay with their great-uncle, she promised, and so the man simply complimented the delicious cooking. But the juniper tree had seen everything. Overnight, the man became terribly ill, and by morning, he passed away. The woman knew it was her terrible secret that had killed him too, so she placed his body in a wagon and wheeled him to the juniper tree, where she buried him next to his first wife. Once he was covered completely by soil, the woman turned back to collect her daughter's body from the barn. But she couldn't believe her eyes. Her beautiful daughter was walking towards her. The poison had not been as strong as she intended, and the poor young girl had survived after all. As the mother took off running towards her, a flurry of birds burst forth from the juniper tree, screeching and flapping their wings. The sky darkened, blocked by their feathers, and the entire tree shook from their exodus. One bird swooped down toward the woman, dropping a large stone directly onto her head and killing her instantly, and the young girl screamed. The bird landed on the ground next to the woman's body, and the girl saw the shadowy figure of her stepbrother standing behind it. The bird had snow-white feathers and a blood-red beak, and after wiping her tears, she held out her hand in invitation. The shadow disappeared, and the tiny bird hopped onto her finger, then up to her shoulder, where he sat as she walked back to their home.